Representative Schreiberbeck.
Here.
Representative Zucke.
Here.
Representative Huntsford.
Here.
Representative Kelch.
Yes.
Representative Mock.
Here.
Let the record show Representative Johnson is here. What? Doing the scoring mock invitation.
There you go.
All right, I just want to welcome everybody here. Committee welcome. Hope you had a good weekend. Enjoyed the Super Bowl. A little excitement at the very end there. So good to watch. Before we start this morning, I just want to lay down a couple ground rules. On the bill, I expect everybody to be respectful and professional when they testify this morning. We're going to give 90 minutes to each side. We have a clipboard going around. Make sure you sign in to let your position known. If you wish not to testify. If you do testify, we ask that you don't repeat the previous speakers, that you stick to the point of the bill. I will tolerate no booing, cheering, any demonstrations whatsoever. I'll gavel you out in a heartbeat. And I'll ask the Sergeant at Arms to remove you. If you feel you need to get something off your chest, go out in the hallway. You can have at it. Committee. Mike Schott is going to play some music for us today. Committee, I just want to remind you, and I know I have in the past, to just keep your questions tight and to the point, and we'll have a good hearing. So, any questions from the committee before we get started? With that, we'll open the hearing on House Bill 1461.
House Bill 1461, relating to the authority of the Superintendent of Public Instruction and other state officials and agencies and to standards and assessments, to amend relating to the duties of the Superintendent of Public Instruction and professional development, and to repeal relating to the state assessments, to provide an appropriation, a legislative management study, and an effective date.
Thank you, Donna. Representative Kasper, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. For the record, my name is Representative Jim Kasper, District 46 in Fargo. We're here obviously to discuss House Bill 1461, which is the bill that would withdraw North Dakota from Common Core. Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to thank you for the discussions you and I have had prior to this hearing, and we've agreed upon a process. We have 3 experts from out of state that will be testifying. They're lined up over here, and I'll introduce them shortly. And as we agreed, the committee would be so kind to hold questions until all 3 have had their opportunity to testify, and then they can all 3 come back. And the reason is each one will be testifying in a particular area of the bill. And if you have a question on an area that the first testifier does not cover, the second or the third testifier might be covering it. So I thank you very much for agreeing to that, Mr. Chairman. With that, Mr. Chairman, I also do have an amendment to the bill, which I will hand out at the appropriate time. I want to begin by focusing on what I believe is the key issue in this bill, and I think most of the people in this room would agree, and that is what's best for the kids in North Dakota. We have different attitudes and thoughts about where we ought to go with Common Core, where we ought to go with how we teach our kids. But I think everyone in this room should focus on what's best for our kids. And the testimony that we're going to hear from the side that wants us to withdraw from Common Core, I think, will be compelling and will be something that I hope the committee considers very strongly in your deliberation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to read a few points from Article 8 in the North Dakota Constitution on the education section. And I'll be skipping across paragraphs. The Legislative Assembly shall make provision for the establishment and maintenance of a system of public schools. The legislative requirement shall be irrevocable without consent of the United States and the people of North Dakota. The Legislative Assembly shall provide for a uniform system of free public schools throughout the state. The Legislative Assembly shall take such other steps as may be necessary to prevent illiteracy, secure a reasonable degree of uniformity in course of study, and promote industrial, scientific, and agricultural improvements. So, Mr. Chairman and committee members, I think it's clear that the North Dakota Constitution delegates the authority for the education decisions in the state of North Dakota to this legislative body. And of course, over the years, we've delegated a lot of the responsibility to the Department of Public Instruction. But ultimately, the decisions that occur in the education of our kids in North Dakota rest with this body. And the bill that you have before us is going to assert the legislative authority and responsibility and do some things that I think are important over the next 2 years. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll walk through the bill with the committee. On page 1, lines 13, the Superintendent of Public Instruction duties. There's only one change in the duties of the Department of Public Instruction, and that's on line 19, where we cross off the word supervise and put in participate in the development of content standards. The reason being, the contention and the concern with this bill is that the Common Core standards that were developed and signed on to by the Department of Public Instruction and the Governor of North Dakota are not what we should be having for our kids in North Dakota. And so the process that the bill requires, setting up an interim legislative committee headed by legislators, will be the key determinant in the supervision of the content standards. And over the next 2 years, that legislative interim committee will be holding public hearings with the help of a subcommittee that the bill calls for. And so therefore, the superintendent would not be supervising that process. The legislature would be supervising the process, as the Constitution says. Going over to page 2, section 2, the Superintendent of Public Instruction on line 9, the authority and limitation. Number 1 on line 10, without statutory authority by the Legislative Assembly, the Superintendent of Public Instruction may not commit this state or any political subdivision of this state to participate at any level in any organization, consortium, association, or like entity. That's what has occurred with the joining of North Dakota to the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium through the Department of Public Instruction's action. That is, we are participating in it, and line 15, we signed on to it. And I don't know about those in the room, but I was in the legislature in 2010 and since, and I do not recall being asked or being discussed with the legislative body whether or not the state of North Dakota should enter into this agreement with the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium. So therefore, this bill limits the authority of the Department of Public Instruction to do those things in the future. It doesn't say we won't do it, it doesn't say we can't do it, but it limits the department's authority to do it on its own without the legislative oversight. Page 3, section 4, here's where I have the amendment, Mr. Chairman, and I'll pass it out for the committee. As the amendment is being passed out, in the essence of time, I'll continue on. Withdrawal from the Smarter Balance Consortium. As I indicated, North Dakota joined the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium in June of 2010. We signed on as an advisory member, and the Governor Hoban signed that memorandum, as did Wayne Sanstead, the Superintendent of Public Instruction at the time. And that bound North Dakota to be an accessory member until 2013, when the decision was made by the Department of Public Instruction to become a full member of the governing body. With that, a signature by the Department of Public Instruction in 2013, we became a full-fledged member of the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium. And as I will read to you in a future part of my testimony, that has delegated the authority of the state of North Dakota to the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium to make the decisions and the directions of our standards and our assessments for our kids and our school system. The bill as originally written just addressed Smarter Balance, but we have since been informed that in November of 2014, North Dakota signed on to another consortium. And what has happened in the last 6 or 8 months, the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium was located in the state of Washington. They signed an agreement with UCLA down in California to transfer the authority and the running of Smarter Balance down there. And in November 14th, I believe, of 2014, North Dakota signed on to that. So the amendment, Mr. Chairman, simply addresses all areas that the Department of Public Instruction might have signed that we might not even know about, that there might be other consortiums that are out there that have not been disclosed. I'm not suggesting that there are, but we want to be sure that it's very clear that North Dakota will withdraw from anything that has to do with smart balance. Then going to section 5, lines 18, interim standards and assessments. What we're doing over the next 2 years, there's been a lot of concern. What's going to happen if North Dakota withdraws from the smarter balance? What will the schools do? How will we teach? Well, Mr. Chairman and committee members, the bill authorizes the school districts, the school boards, the administrators of the school districts to teach as they wish. They can test as they wish, they can teach as they wish. If they want to continue teaching part of Common Core, that's up to them, but we will no longer have the assessments in the state of North Dakota, which is the tests. And we will not be implementing anything that has to do with Common Core until the Legislative Assembly acts in 2017. So the power to teach our kids and the power to educate our kids goes to the school boards, the teachers, and the administration of the school boards, as I think it should, with the oversight and direction of the Legislative Assembly. It also says on line 25 that a school district may act independently, jointly, or with one or more districts, or as a member of a regional education association to meet the requirements of this section. So kids will be able to get grades if those school boards and school districts and teachers would like so. But they're going to be done by the school boards in the local control area where, contrary to what some folks think, we've lost local control of that because of our signing on to the smarter balance. On page 4, top of the page, use of state resources is prohibited. No state agency may directly or indirectly utilize state resources in support of or advancement of the Common Core standards and the Common Core assessments. And so we're prohibiting that. And then, Mr. Chairman, section 7 on page 4. This is the Legislative Interim Committee that the bill sets up. And as we all know as legislators, and a lot of the public knows, the Interim Committee will work over the next 2 years once the Legislative Assembly adjourns. And be appointed by the Legislative Management Committee, and we as legislators, whoever's on that committee, will then establish a subcommittee. Because legislators, as been noted in the press by the opposition to the bill, don't really know that much about education. It's been questioned whether or not I know anything about education. The forum thinks I ought to wear a dunce cap, and I thought that was sort of funny. Just for the record, I graduated from Beulah High School. I was third in my class with a 93-point average, and missed being in the valedictorian by 0.05%. Graduated from NDSU with a degree in business economics, and have a lot of other education since. So let the record know that maybe I'm not quite a dunce that the forum thinks I ought to be or am. The Legislative Interim Committee then, Mr. Chairman, beginning on lines 12, would appoint a working group made up of legislators, school district administrators, higher education faculty members who are content experts in the areas of English language, arts, or mathematics, teachers, parents, business representatives, state officials, government staff, to review existing English language, arts, and mathematics content standards from a variety of states and sources. So what this bill is saying, Mr. Chairman, committee, there are a lot of good sources out beyond the North Dakota border. There are states who have been noted as excellent in English literature, such as California, Indiana, Massachusetts, and Alabama. States that have had high standards in math, such as California, Indiana, Massachusetts, and Minnesota. This bill allows that interim committee to look outside of our borders to see what standards are out there that other states have used, where excellence has been achieved in those areas until Common Core has come along. As an anecdote, the state of New York has been administering their Common Core tests, and I've been told that 70% of the kids in the state of New York are flunking the Common Core tests. Well, when we have a one-size-fits-all standard for the whole nation, it's pretty easy to see that one size does not fit all. Continuing on line 21, the standards must be internationally benchmarked, and they will provide for from kindergarten through grade 12. On line 29, the interim committee may contract with individuals or organizations in this state or outside of the state to accomplish the directives. That was another criticism I saw in the newspaper, I think by one of the people who may be testifying. Well, the fact of the matter is, Mr. Chairman and committee members, as you know, when we have an interim committee study, we may look to outside of the state of North Dakota for some experts to help us. That's not uncommon. But the interim committee will determine whether we go outside for experts to help or we stay within our borders. But the bill just allows is the choice of that interim committee to do one or both. On top of page 5, the interim committee on line 1 shall contract with an individual to serve as an executive director. Why is that? This is a big process. over the next 2 years. You need someone to make sure the process moves forward, to coordinate the meetings, to coordinate public hearings, to all the things that are important for the people in North Dakota to have their input into the process that we will be going through in North Dakota. So the bill authorizes $750,000 appropriation and authorizes them to hire an executive director. I would assume it would be someone from North Dakota, but it does not state that. And they can also hire staff if they so desire, but obviously the legislative council will have staff on that interim committee. Line 9, the interim committee will receive progress reports. Line 14, once the working group has completed its charge, it will report to the interim committee what it's found. So after a 2-year period of time where the citizens have had their input, the teachers have had their input, school board members have had their input, the parents have had their input, legislators have had their input, they will now report to the legislative interim committee, and that interim committee then will listen to their reports, and they will have updated reports throughout the 2 years to the interim committee. And at the end of that period of time, as we all know in the interim committee process, a piece of legislation may be drafted that would be passed forward by that interim committee. The interim committee could choose to do nothing, by the way. They could choose to say, what we have is we're going to stay with it. This does not prohibit that. It just says the interim committee is going to decide. And the bill then, if there is a bill brought forward, will be reported to the 2017 legislative session. And the 2017 legislative session then will take up that bill, and we'll have a hearing just like we are today. And there could be discussion, amendments, and the legislature is going to act on what we do for contents and standards in our education system in North Dakota, like the Constitution says we should be, Mr. Chairman. Now, moving on, there's been some discussion.
Representative Kasper, I got a question before you move on. In regard to this committee, so we have the interim committee. It's set up by legislative management. It's made up. They have the hearings. They have their input. They come up with their report, the interim committee, and then they forward it to the legislative management. So, am I understanding it right then? The legislative body will then have final say on these standards? Because
Correct.
Those standards could be changed in legislative management.
Well, Mr. Chairman, committee members, as we know, the legislative process works that way. Legislative management, if they so desire, can make changes. I've never seen that where legislative management takes a bill from an interim committee and changes it. I think that would be highly unlikely. Obviously, our process allows for that right now, so it could, but I don't think it would.
But at the end of the day, yeah. All right.
At the end of the day, it could, Mr. Chairman, absolutely.
Go ahead.
We hire a legislative manager, we elect legislative management to make those decisions when we're not there. There's just been discussion about how great this bill is, or this Common Core thing is in other states. What's interesting, and in the packet that I handed out to you, it's latest information about states that have withdrawn from Common Core across the country and other items. So in the handout, I'll just read them. The states that have drawn out of the Common Core Assessment Consortium are Utah, Oklahoma, Georgia, Alabama, Indiana, Kansas, Pennsylvania, Alaska, Florida, and just recently Mississippi. Now they've withdrawn out of one or more of the Common Core assessments. States considering withdrawing are Michigan, Kentucky, North Carolina, Iowa, and Washington State, which I will discuss in a minute. And states that never joined are Virginia, Texas, Nebraska, and Minnesota. So, Mr. Chairman and committee members, Common Core is unraveling before our eyes, and North Dakota is not the only state considering withdrawing, and I think that's a good thing. Santa Clara, California, with 57,000 students, they've indicated that they believe the test for Smarter Balance in the state of California will cost over $1 billion, and they are revolting, saying they want the Legislative Assembly to pay for those tests and not the local school districts. The Virginia State Senate voted to prohibit adoption of Common Core in 2015, just recently. In Chicago, Arnie Duncan, Secretary of the Department of Education, has threatened to cut off $1.2 billion in state aid if Chicago doesn't give the PARC test, which is the sister organization of Smarter Balance. In Colorado, the State Board of Education, January 30th, 2015, by a 5-3 vote, voted to pull Colorado out of Common Core state standards and PARC testing. Wisconsin has discovered in January of 2015 that the cost of testing for the Smarter Balance is going to be substantially higher, $7 to $8 million higher than what was projected. The New York Board of Directors of New York State United Teachers, a 600,000 union in January of 2015, approved a resolution that withdraws its entire support of the Common Core standards in New York. The Chicago Teachers Union, House of Delegates, passed a resolution opposing the use of Common Core standards in teaching and testing, and the Chicago Union President, Karen Lewis, said, and I quote, "I agree with educators and parents from across the country The Common Core mandate represents an overreach in federal power into personal privacy as well as into state education autonomy. Common Core eliminates creativity in the classroom and impedes collaboration. So, Mr. Chairman, that's just a few areas. And I mentioned the state of Washington. There was a historic thing that happened in the state of Washington about a week ago. The state of Washington Democrat Party voted to have the state of Washington withdraw from Common Core. Now, what's interesting about that decision is the state of Washington is the home of Bill and Melinda Gates, who have been championing Common Core, and it's where the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium had its headquarters until it delegated it to UCLA. Now I'd like to read briefly from the Memorandum of Understanding that North Dakota has signed on to. And this is in the memorandum, page 3. The responsibilities of the states in the consortium. Each state agrees to the following element of the consortium's assessment system. Adopt the Common Core standards, which are college and career ready and standards, and which the consortium's assessment will be aligned no later than December of 2011, which we did. Each state that is a member of the consortium in 2014 and 15 agrees to adopt the Common Core standards, fully implement statewide the consortium summative assessments in grades 3 through 8, adhere to the governance as outlined in this document, agree to support the decisions of the consortium, and identify and implement a plan to adhere to address barriers in state law, statute, regulation, or policy to implementing the proposed assessment system. Mr. Chairman, if the committee would read the Memorandum of Understanding and the one that we signed with UCLA, you will find that the decision-making process for the education system in the state of North Dakota is no longer in our state. As the critics to this bill have said, it is without our state, in the rest in the hands of the UCLA and the consortium, of which North Dakota has about a 4% vote. The other handouts that I've given you, Mr. Chairman, have to give you some information about some other things that have been happening. So with that, if there are no questions, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce our 3 guest speakers briefly and have them come up here for their comments.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kasper, I have a couple of questions here before I let Representative Schreiber back talk. In the bill, in page 5, section 7, it states that the committee work has to be done by November 16. So my question is, what do the districts do when it comes to the math and English standards for the next 15 to 16 months? Can they all pick different, or how would that work?
Mr. Chairman and committee members, that's absolutely right. They can choose to teach how they've been teaching in the past before Common Core came on board. What they cannot do is use the Common Core assessments and standards. We were teaching kids since statehood, so nothing changes. They may go back 3 or 4 or 5 years on how they were teaching their kids. That's up to them. But it's local control. The school boards and the school districts will decide how to teach and what to teach.
So you like to quote the Constitution, which is always pretty fun. And he did this morning, but doesn't this bill violate the Constitution? Because in the Constitution, I have it here, it says, shall provide for a uniform system of free public schools throughout the state. So how does this bill then provide for uniform if for the next 15 to 16 months we're all over the map of standards at the districts?
Well, Mr. Chairman, committee members, over the next 16 months, the school districts are going to be uniform in their own district. But the only way we can get out of Common Core is to withdraw. The only way we can have a process to determine where we're going to be is through the process outlined in the bill. So, Mr. Chairman, I would say that if you think that's a violation of the Constitution, then you should make a challenge.
Representative Schreiber-Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Kasper. Just a couple of questions for clarification, and you just touched on it again. When you talked about the school boards developing their own standards, they could do anything they want. They could probably use what was in place right now, but then twice now, just now and then before, you said, but they can't use anything related to the Common Core standard. And it's page 4 up at the top, prohibition. So now I'm a little bit confused because I think I heard you contradict what was stated.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Beck, it says use of state resources prohibition. So it says the state will not be funding any of those items. The school boards, if the school board chooses to continue on with the Common Core standards in their own district, they're going to do it.
So
they will not have the assessments by the state.
You may.
Then, so they would not receive any dollars from the state?
No, we would not give them any dollars to
if they were going to do Common Core. Okay. Then, may I continue?
You may.
But Mr. Chairman and Representative Schreiber-Beck, let me point out that We will continue to appropriate all the funds that we normally do in the education committees. So that does not take the funding away. It just says they will not get additional resources to do that.
Thank you on that one. Continue on, Representative Kasper, did I hear you say there would be no assessments?
There would be no Common Core assessment, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Schreiber-Beck, there would be no Common Core assessments. They're gone.
Okay, that
But
was
testing can continue by the Department of Public Instruction. That was a discussion I had with Amy Kopis earlier this morning. This is not intended to stop any other assessments that the Department of Public Instruction does with our students. The ACT, the SAT, other tests that they do, that's fine. We're just not going to have our kids take the Common Core assessment standard tests. That's good, that's done.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, a couple more questions, and I may continue with the
One more.
questions on the bill. Okay. The $750,000 appropriation, that will cover the standards development process and the study, correct? Or am I mistaken in my interpretation?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Schreiber-Beck, that's the intent. Visiting with Anita Thomas, asking her best estimate of a potential cost, she thought $750,000 would be appropriate.
And that's to provide a delivered product.
That's to, Mr. Chairman, Representative Schreiber-Beck, that's to set up the interim study group, to have them do their meetings, to have them meet and do their planning, to cover their travel expenses, and so on. So $750,000 was considered to be appropriate.
So Representative Kasper, off of that, when it comes to the test then, so we pay $750 to build this committee, and the committee says, hey, we want to build our own tests. How much would that cost?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I have no idea, because the interim committee will not be building the test. They will be making recommendations of what the Legislative Assembly should consider in 2017. The Legislative Assembly will make that final decision.
Representative Mott, did you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Kasper, in section 7, and maybe I just need a little more clarification, but on lines 17 and 18, you talk about the states that we would, shall use in our study, including the standards used in California and Massachusetts. In your testimony, you also cited states Indiana, Alabama, Minnesota, and I may even miss one or two others. Why do you single out just those two states? What is it about those two states that we need to look at that we shouldn't be considering from others?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mock, it's been known by the experts in the education community that those are two states that have had excellent standards before Common Core. So it's simply asking the committee to look at those states. They can certainly look at all other 49 states if they so choose.
If I may, did those states implement Common Core?
California, is that one of them?
Yes.
California did, but there is a large movement in California to get out, but they did. Just like 45 states did to begin with, and a lot of them are getting out after they understood what it's all about.
In Massachusetts?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Mock, Massachusetts also did, and I think Professor Stotsky, if home state is Massachusetts, you might want to ask her what they're doing there now.
Okay, and if I may, I have another section. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Kasper. On line 29 of page 4, you talk about the interim committee contracting with individuals or organizations both in and out of the state. You've cited a lot of examples where states have withdrawn from Common Core and are developing their own standards. I can't imagine you don't have a list of organizations or people on hand or that would be available to help develop these standards. Can you provide some information, some context for this committee? Who would the state likely be contracting with to develop these standards? Who are the other states working with? Who would be employed by the state of North Dakota to help develop new standards?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mock, I will be happy to look for that information for you. But as the bill requires, the interim committee is going to do the search for who they would contract with. There will be, I'm sure, educators that are much better versed in making recommendations like that, so I don't want to take away from that at this point.
Okay, and one more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You say that we shall hire an executive director. Doesn't the state already hire an executive director when it comes to public education? Don't the people of North Dakota hire an executive director every 4 years as the superintendent of public instruction? Why should the state venture down in approximately a $300,000 position to develop standards when we already have an entire department, including a superintendent, doing this exact thing?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mock, that's a good question. How did we get here today, Representative Mock? Why are we in front of this committee today? It's because in the opinion of a lot of people, myself included, the Department of Public Instruction, starting with Wayne Sandstead, and the Department of Public Instruction, now under the direction of Kirsten Baszler, made a mistake when they signed on to Common Core in 2010, and then reiterated the Memorandum of Understanding in November of 2014. So the people of North Dakota want an unbiased person. Let me put it a different way. My goal is that we have an unbiased person in charge of the coordination. The executive director is going to be coordinating, going to be helping the interim committee do its job. The job of the executive director is not to make policy, it's to coordinate the activities of the committee that will be under the perusal of the legislative interim committee.
Representative Kasper, piggybacking off of Representative Mock's question. You know, right now, if the public doesn't like what's happening with math and reading standards, they can go to Superintendent Baszler and give her an earful and let her know. But right now, with your bill, it makes up all these committees and working groups and everything else. Who's accountable? Who do they then go to complain to and get it changed? Because this bill takes away a lot of her authority, takes away the authority, a lot of authority from the superintendent's position. So if I have a complaint, do I go talk to the 15 people on the committee? Do I go talk to legislative management? Who would I go air my grievance with?
Well, Mr. Chairman, committee members, the people of North Dakota have been doing that for the last 2 to 3 years. It's been falling on deaf ears. They can start at the school board level, Mr. Chairman. They can start with the administration, Mr. Chairman. They can go to the Department of Public Instruction, Mr. Chairman. They can go to their legislator, Mr. Chairman. But this interim process is going to have a way that the people, including the parents, will be involved to help try to determine what our standards and assessments ought to be.
Representative Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative. You had mentioned that Governor Hogan also signed on to the original document, bringing us into Common Core. In the November 14 document, did the governor also sign off on that one?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kelch, no, it was Mr. Marthaler who signed the document. And he's in the DPI.
No, Mr. Chairman. It did not require the governor to sign off on that document in November 14?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kelch, no, it appears it did not. I actually think it was an unconstitutional reach over the power of this legislative body, but that was a decision that DPI made.
Thank you.
All right, this evening, in the interest of time, let's go to the speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'll introduce all 3 speakers. As we've agreed, they're going to come up consecutively, and then they'll come back for questions if that's fine. Professor Stotsky, I've handed out her background. There's about 29 pages of her credentials. It's amazing what she's done over her career. She's a professor emeritus at the University of Arkansas. She's one of a select group of people who serve on the original validation committee of the Common Core. There were about under 30 people on that committee. She's testified before numerous legislative bodies in the last number of years. She's been all over the country. She's been on national television. She's written all kinds of articles. She's been interviewed by Fox News. So she will be bringing her testimony. Professor Jim Milgram, professor at Stanford University. He's also an original member of the Common Core Validation Committee. He was the only mathematician on the committee. He has his dossier in front of you. He will discuss the mathematics standards and why he believes Common Core is not the method this country should use to utilize to teach kids. And our third presenter is Mr. John Sauer. He's an attorney and partner of the law firm of Clark & Sauer. He specializes in complex litigation, including constitutional litigation. He's a graduate of Duke University. He served as a law clerk for the U.S. Supreme Court and for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. He has conducted extensive study on the legal and constitutional issues raised by the Federal Department of Education's implementation of Common Core, and he is a lead counsel in the lawsuit in the state of Missouri stating that the smarter balance is actually unconstitutional. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn the podium over to our 3 guest speakers, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Kasper, apparently you've got concerns with our Department of Public Instruction. to move forward, the person you're gonna hire to set up this committee, or you're gonna do the study, are you gonna have qualifiers that you can be a part of the Department of Public Instruction, or are you gonna have a whole new group for study indigenous?
Well, for the record, Representative Kasper, Mr. Chairman, Representative Johnson, that's not for my decision. The interim committee chairman will be determining who they hire and what that person's qualifications are. So it's not my decision at all. That's going to be up to the board. Mr. Chairman, I want to make.
He's got a follow-up.
I want to make a clarification. The question was asked about one of the testifiers being paid. Let me assure the committee, let me assure the audience that none of our 3 guests from out of the state were paid a nickel. From the best of my knowledge, they do not belong to any organization. They're here in their own volition. In fact, their travel expenses were raised by the people in this room. They all donated dollars to get them here. And they travel all over the United States like this, testifying in front of legislatures, and they are not a part of any organization. They just care about education of kids.
Representative Johnson, follow-up?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I realize that, Representative Casper, you probably wouldn't have that control, but this is a bill. And what, I guess my question is what your intent would be as far as how would you like to see it? I mean, are we going to have somebody from, does it have to be from North Dakota to head up this committee, or is it going to be a national-wide search, or what do you envision this?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Johnson, all I can do is repeat what I just said. Chairman of the interim committee will make the best judgment. I have a lot of confidence in the legislators in the state of North Dakota. I have no desire to influence that process whatsoever. They can hire someone in this room if they choose to do that. I don't think we need to go outside of North Dakota in most cases to find qualified people. One other thing, Mr. Chairman, as far as your comment about develop our own standards in North Dakota, the bill is opening up, and I mentioned that we should look at California and Massachusetts. And the bill would allow North Dakota, the interim committee and the interim group committee, working committee, come up with a recommendation, as Professor Stotsky said, maybe we want to develop Massachusetts standards and they're free. So this does not require us to spend a lot of money. It requires us to look at options and opportunities for the development of standards and assessments. Mr. Chairman, there's one gentleman sitting over here that would like to summarize for the people in North Dakota that are here.
Yep, and he'll have a chance. Yep, we have a little bit of time here.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Milgren.
Mr. Milgren, please.
Dr. Milgren, I just have one question. When you were talking about in your testimony about mathematics, it was, to me, I could conclude that no North Dakota high schools are currently teaching calculus or supplementing their own curriculum for geometry. Is that really what you meant, that we're not teaching it, or the Common Core standards don't allow to teach it, or don't
Common Core
include it?
standards don't support the teaching of the courses that lead to calculus as either a final course in high school or as a first course at the college level. They simply do not support that path. And so it has to be done by the individual high schools. And here's the reality. Again, you look at data from the National Center for Educational Statistics, and what you find is that if you break if you break the districts in the country into five demographic levels, so 20% at the lowest level, 20% at the top level, and 60% in between, you find that it is more than twice as likely that you will not have any access to calculus at a high school in the lowest demographic districts as it will be in the highest. So in a free situation where you don't have constraints on the schools, that's what the norm would be. And so it's going to be that with Common Core, because there's nothing there that says you have to teach calculus, or you have to have a pathway to calculus accessible to students. So the reality is, in schools that are tight for money, it'll go away.
Okay, in the interest of time,